Hey, MCARBO brother, I'm Chris Nelson, President of MCARBO. Really excited to introduce the new KEL TEC P11 trigger spring kit for the discontinued KEL TEC P11 pistol. There's a ton of them out there, so we wanted to do something for you guys. A lot of guys got these P11s. They're still great. They've been around for a long time. A lot of people have even ripped them off and made similar versions of the P11. So really excited to finally reduce this trigger pull, give you a nice lighter trigger pull for your KEL TEC P11. We've also got the textured rubber adhesive grips for these, not pictured here obviously, and then the stainless steel guide rod and the max control 20-pound recoil spring. All those things are going to do a really nice number on this P11, really upgrading it from really kind of plain 9mm pistol to something really functional with a lot of good performance in it. A lot of little simple modifications when paired together make a night and day difference for this little P11 pistol. Really love this thing, but the trigger pull was heavy, starting around 7.5 pounds. We were able to get it down to about 3.5 pounds. So a significant trigger pull reduction. Really happy with it. Let's get it on our tabletop, put this baby in. Let's see what kind of factory trigger pull we're starting with. 7 pounds, 3.7 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 7 pounds, 5.7 ounces. Parts needed for this build: the KEL TEC P11 trigger spring kit by MCARBO includes a lighter custom hammer spring, lighter custom firing pin spring, lighter custom trigger return spring, KEL TEC P11 stainless steel guide rod. This is a 3/16 stainless steel replacement, a phenomenal upgrade for that plastic guide rod that's in there now. And the KEL TEC PF9 P11 max control 20-pound recoil spring. These are compatible for both firearms. Great upgrade. It's going to help reduce some of that felt recoil and muzzle flip. Great way to help put some extra control in these little pistols. Tools needed for this build: 1/16 inch punch, 3/32 inch punch, 1/8 inch punch, hammer, bench block pliers, medium tip flathead screwdriver, micro tip flathead screwdriver, 3/32 inch Allen key, blue 242 Loctite, synthetic grease with PTFE, a little paper clip to assist with removing that hammer seat pin. Flashlight comes in handy, and as always guys, make sure we're an eye pro. As always, let's go ahead and check our firearms together, make sure they're clear, check the chamber, check the bolt face, check the magazine well. This firearm's clear. All right, we're gonna get started with a simple field strip, so go ahead and lock the slide back, take your micro tip, it just helps. Pop out the assembly pin right there. All right, go ahead and release the slide, pull it all the way forward. Now you've got your slide off of the frame, set that down, and now you've got your aluminum frame, your plastic pistol grip frame. We're gonna go ahead and pull all of this apart. We're gonna start with the slide first. It's gonna be the simplest. Go ahead and push in on the recoil spring and guide rod, pop it out. All right, now we can separate the recoil springs. There's a smaller and a larger one. They just stack together like this. And then there's a plastic guide rod here. Just wear real easily. They don't really last a lifetime. They can also bend, misshape. So we're gonna replace that with the stainless steel guide rod. And we're also gonna replace these recoil springs. Recoil springs can wear out. It's a good idea to replace them over time. So we're gonna go ahead and give this an upgrade. It is P11, a little bit older. They actually discontinued making these, believe it or not. So go ahead and you can pull out the barrel. Now we're going to go ahead and pull out the firing pin, and we're going to swap out that firing pin spring. That's one of the springs in the trigger spring kit. So we'll actually take our 3/32 inch Allen key, and we're going to remove this set screw on top of the slide here. That's going to allow us to remove the firing pin and firing pin spring, and we're going to replace that with a lighter firing pin spring in the trigger spring kit. So you'll notice you can push on the firing pin and test the operation here. What we're going to do is loosen up this set screw, but we want to be careful not to lose that firing pin and spring. So we'll take our 1/8 inch punch and we'll just set it on top, just to be on the safe side here. Shouldn't take too long to get it out. There you go. Pretty simple. Only had to back out a couple threads to get that firing pin out. All right, firing pin and spring are out. So we're going to replace this firing pin spring with the lighter MCARBO firing pin spring. So let's go ahead and grab that trigger spring kit now. Might as well grab all the rest of the components that we were just looking at. We can open them up. I'm going to save one bag just for the spare parts. I'm going to rip open the rest of the bags. So this is the MCARBO KEL TEC P11 trigger spring kit. It's got 3 lighter custom designed springs. So you got your lighter trigger return spring, your lighter firing pin spring, and your lighter hammer spring. So what we need right now is this lighter firing pin spring. So I'm just going to slide over the firing pin spring on that firing pin, and we're going to insert it and make sure we get that set screw lined up with this notch right here. So we drop it right in. You're going to make sure the smooth side is facing you like that. Before we tighten up that set screw there, putting the firing pin back in place, let's go ahead and put a dab of blue 242 Loctite on those threads. Just a good way to make sure that it doesn't back off on you. All right, so just take your 1/8 inch punch and we're going to press the firing pin. Just make sure that little flat recess is lined up with the top of the slide so that set screw can locate inside of it. So we're going to push down with our punch and compress that firing pin all the way. See that? Then we're going to take our 3/32 inch Allen key. We're going to tighten it right up. Just past flush. You'll see that, that's how far we go. You should feel it impact that firing pin. It'll sit right there in that recess. And then we just want to check the function and make sure that it's still moving freely. If you've tightened it too tight, it won't move very freely. So that's very critical. We test to make sure that it still moves freely, which this one does. That's perfect. So we've got our first spring replaced. We've got 2 extras here that we'll put into the frame, so we can set those aside next to the frame. Got our factory firing pin spring. We'll throw that in a little plastic bag. Always handy to keep them for later. Stainless steel guide rod. Go ahead and rip that bag open. We're going to replace that plastic one, and then we've got our 20-pound max control recoil spring. Going to help reduce that felt recoil, muzzle flip, and it's really just a great idea if you've got worn out springs to replace them. So you got the smaller one that goes in the bigger one, just like that. Stainless steel guide rod slides in right like that. Just a really beautiful part, man. Nicely machined, way better than the factory plastic part that bends, wears, and the little worn out springs there. So we'll set those aside, don't need that. Grab our barrel, we'll drop it right in, just like that. And then we're going to take our recoil spring and guide rod, and we will drop it right in, locates in that hole there on the slide, and then we push the recoil spring and guide rod forward, and it locates right there in that lug, and we're good to go. That slide is done. So now we can focus on that pistol grip frame, replace 2 simple springs, and we are finished. All right, so for the disassembly on the pistol grip frame, we need to remove this hammer spring catch down here and the hammer spring pin. So we'll pull up on the hammer spring catch and we'll pull it forward. Just one smooth motion, just like that. You see it's got to clear those 2 little tabs on the polymer frame, and that's how it fits and locates. So real simple, and you can rotate it a little bit so it'll drop down in there, no tension on it. And that'll be a real simple, easy replacement here in a second. Now we take our 1/8 inch punch and we tap out these 3 frame pins right here. They're plastic frame pins, they're universal, so it doesn't really matter if you get them mixed up. Go ahead and just start with this one out here. You may not even really need to tap it. It just pushes right out for me. All right, got those 3 pins out. You can see they're all the same, just like that. Set them aside. Now we're going to go ahead and pull back on the trigger just a hair and pull up on that aluminum frame, pinching the front portion of that aluminum frame. It'll kind of keep all that linkage together. It's nice to be able to pull it apart and see it, how it goes back together. If you don't pinch it up there, it'll all spring apart. So you'll see here's your slide stop and slide stop spring over here. When we rotate it around, you can see your trigger return spring and your trigger bar here. And you got your hammer in here, got your ejector up top, you got your hammer spring and the hammer spring seat down here. So you can see how everything locates together. Some really important features are the loops on this hammer spring. So you can see this top loop right here on the hammer spring, the relationship it has to that hammer. So you can see the hammer strike faces up here, and when we look on the underside, you can see that loop of the hammer spring, the way it opens up towards the rear of the aluminum frame, towards the serial number. So remember that little loop opens up towards the rear of the frame, same with down here. So we'll push down on this hammer spring, and there's your little hammer spring pin right there. All right, you'll pull that out, and this hammer spring catch, it'll just come right off that spring like that. All right, and then we look at the orientation of this spring as well. So both loops are facing the rear of the aluminum frame. Very critical detail, and the shorter leg goes towards that hammer spring catch. Longer leg goes up there on the hammer. Very important. I'm glad we went into that painful detail because it helps. All right, then the trigger bar, we'll just go ahead and pop it right off. It's under spring tension, so watch that little guy, it'll fling right at you. All right, trigger bar comes right off. You can see that little tab locates under the hammer in there. So we'll set that aside, and this is all captured together. We'll deal with that in a second. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and remove our slide stop and spring. Just take notice that long leg of the slide stop spring is up top. All right, that's very important. Want to replicate that. So take your micro tip, pop off that spring, and then we'll just pull out our slide stop. It's located behind on the inside of the frame, just like that. So you just kind of wiggle it out. All right, we'll set down our slide stop and press out that hammer hinge pin right there. So we press out that hammer hinge pin. You can see there's the head of it there on the left-hand side of the aluminum frame. All right, you'll notice it's just a bigger hole where it locates into, real simple. So we'll set down that hammer hinge pin. You can see it there. And now we'll go ahead and push out that hammer with the spring. All right, we'll take one more good look at it. You can see the orientation. We still have to replace this spring, so it'll be simple to replicate. You can see there's the loops there facing away from the hammer strike face right here. Strike face is usually good and worn from hitting that firing pin. All right, we can set that little assembly down. Now we just need to remove the trigger so we can get access to that trigger return spring. So it's just a matter of popping out the pin that holds that trigger return spring in place that also goes through the trigger return spring, and the trigger axis here. So those three components are all held in with that one pin. So what we have to do is just tap out that pin. So you see there's a little through hole there. If you move that trigger, you'll notice that little portion of the pin right there. The head of the pin is on the bottom, so we want to tap it out from the top here. So we just find the pin right there, just like that. You can see it shiny right there. Take our little 1/16 inch punch and we'll tap it right out. We can try pressing it first. It's a little stiff, so if that doesn't work, we'll go ahead and set it up on the bench block and we'll just give it a few good taps. All right, so we got it positioned on the bench block. What we want to do is make sure we can see that pin and make sure not to hammer too hard. It is a plastic trigger, so we just kind of give it a few easy taps. Make sure we didn't break nothing. Now it's pretty well in there, so you can see there's a little plastic there. See, we're still making a little progress there. It's got to come all the way out, mostly. All right, so once we got just a little bit of it showing, we'll just take our pliers and we'll just grab that pin. It'll be a lot easier, a lot safer on that trigger rather than just hammering away. And you can just rock it back and forth until it breaks free there. There you go. So the pin pops right out just like that. So you can see those tiny little ridges there on that pin. So it works pretty well. It really does hold well in that polymer. We got that out. We'll set it aside. All right, now our trigger return spring should just pop right out. Right there. And our trigger axis, we'll just push that out from the other side. Take your 1/8 inch punch and just push through on it. All right. You can see there's the hole there in the center where that pin locates through. And then pull out your trigger. Simple as that. So we've got this aluminum frame completely disassembled at this point. All right, so these are all the components you should have here in front of you from the pistol grip frame disassembly. So you've got your polymer pistol grip over here. You've got your 3 plastic frame pins here. They're universal. You got your aluminum frame here. You've got your trigger bar here. You've got your slide stop here, your slide stop spring. You've got your trigger return spring here, your trigger axis, your plastic trigger. You've got the trigger pin that holds all these items together. Then you've got your hammer here, your hammer spring. You've got your hammer spring pin and your hammer spring catch down here. And you've got your hammer hinge pin, which locates right in there. So that's all the components we've got. We're going to do a quick swap on the springs and then put it all back together. So these 2 stock springs will replace, and that's it. All right, so we're going to remove the factory hammer spring. Here's the strike face of the hammer here, right? There's the back of the hammer. Remember the loops? Those are facing the back of the hammer away from the strike face, which is right here. So a real simple way to do this is to just tap out enough of this pin here to release this hammer spring, and then we'll just compress it the rest of the way through. It's a quick swap. So we'll take our 3/32 inch punch and we'll just tap it in on this side here. Position it up on the bench block. A few good taps. See how we did. All right, we're going to tap it a little bit more. Perfect. All right, so it popped right out. All right, I'm going to grab the MCARBO hammer spring replacement and I'm going to drop it right in. And strike face is right here. Loops are facing away from the strike face, right? So what we're going to do, Just kind of position it, looking right down those holes there. I want to make sure that loop is lined up perfectly. Then take your pliers and just compress that pin back in. This is the easiest and fastest way to do it. All right, we got it to locate, perfect. Now you can take your punch and just make sure it's completely flush. Go ahead and set aside the factory spring, don't need that anymore. Take your 3/32 inch punch, give it a couple taps. You just want to make sure that pin is recessed on both sides so it doesn't create any interference when it's inside the frame. And that's perfect. So strike face is up here. You can tell by those little wear marks from it hitting the firing pin. Right? You can see some of the other features there. Most importantly, the loops are facing away from the strike face. We got that longer leg of the hammer spring up top, shorter legs down here. The loops are facing away from the strike face. Perfect. So this is done. So now we can go ahead and set aside the hammer and lighter hammer spring. Let's go ahead and focus on replacing the trigger return spring now. So these are the items you're going to need: your trigger axis, your trigger, the lighter MCARBO trigger return spring, and the trigger pin. So what we'll do first is get the trigger in there, drop in the trigger axis, pops right in, and get it to sit in that recess right there. And then we want to line up the holes. Take your 1/16 inch punch and use it as a guide. It'll line up the holes perfectly. You can see how it all goes through there like that. So next what we'll do is we'll get our trigger return spring and we'll get it to locate as well. So we drop it right in and make sure you get that loop to locate on the pin right there. Drop it in, push our punch through, make sure we get everything aligned. And this is when we're going to check with the flashlight. Make sure you got that punch through the eyelet on the trigger return spring. So we're good to go there. And this is the orientation. We want it to be kicked forward like this, all right? Because what we're going to do is wind it. And then that little leg is going to be captured on the trigger return spring. So it's perfect. Now we're going to take the pin, and we're basically going to push out that punch. So we start the pin in there, press it through as far as you can, and then we'll give it a few good taps. Helps too if you sit it on the table. You're just going to kind of pull up on this frame and let that punch fall out as it starts to impact the table. All right, so I can see that pin is starting to push all the way through now. It's not quite there, so I'm just going to hold on to it and tap this pin the rest of the way through, get my bench block, get set up real good. There we go. All right, and you can see in there, that pin went right through the center of that eyelet on that trigger return spring, so that's perfect. We're also going to quickly test it, try to pull out on it, doesn't come out, good. All right, winds around, they all move together, excellent. All right, so now the trigger return spring is replaced. All the springs have been replaced at this point, so we can continue putting the rest of the aluminum frame back together. All right, so now we're going to put the hammer and hammer spring back into the aluminum frame. These are the items we're going to need: the hammer hinge pin, the hammer spring pin, and the hammer spring catch. So we'll put the hammer and hammer spring in first. You'll just drop it right into the frame just like this. All right, making sure our orientation of the spring and the hammer are perfect, like we've beat that horse to death a few times. And then we're going to line up that hinge pin. So you'll see this hole here doesn't have a recess, so we're going to flip it around and make sure we find the hole with the recess. That's where our hammer hinge pin is going to go. So you can see there's a hammer hinge pin there with the head on it. So that's where it's going to sit in the recess. So make sure you got the holes lined up there with the hammer in the frame. Then drop in the hammer hinge pin. It may help too to look from the opposite side so you can line it up perfect, and then push that pin right through. Real simple and easy. All right, so our hammer hinge pin is in there just like that. Perfect. Strike face of the hammer right there. All right, we've got our loops situated appropriately. Now we just need to put that hammer spring catch on. So the hammer spring catch will just sit on just like this. You want that little tab right there facing the rear of the aluminum frame. So we're just going to push it through. All right, so our hammer spring is through on that catch, and then we'll take our pin and we're going to insert it right through that loop on the hammer spring. And then we're going to pull the hammer spring back through the catch until it's tight and it's located in place just like that. Perfect. So now we've got our hammer spring back in with the hammer, the trigger. This thing's coming back together now, so we've only got a few more items to do and we're finished. So now we just need to insert the slide stop and slide stop spring here. We'll do that first before the trigger bar. So on this side of the aluminum frame, drop in your slide stop. You'll notice that there is that hook on the back of the slide stop. We need to make sure it goes through this hole here, right? And then that opening locates on that pin. And you can see on the inside of the frame, the hook made it through. So we're good on the slide stop now. We just need to put the slide stop spring in. So remember that long leg of the spring is going to go on top. So we just compress it, push it into place. You may need to take your punch and just kind of push it the rest of the way down in that little recess. All right, we're good to go. All right, keep your fingers on it just to make sure nothing pops out of place. That's real simple and easy. Now this trigger bar loves to pop out of place. So go ahead and take your trigger bar. We're going to drop it right into that channel. So there's that hole there that locates on the trigger axis, and then there's that little tab that locates inside the frame. Simple as that. Then we're going to take our trigger return spring and wind it back. You want that little bend right there on the spring to locate on the trigger bar. And you see it just pops right into place like that. Super light now, real simple to do with your fingers. And there it is, guys, we're good to go. So we can drop this down into the polymer frame now. Highly recommended doing that. Don't set it down on the table. So you'll grab your frame, you're gonna turn a little hammer spring catch like this. So you got your frame oriented this direction, and then you're gonna rotate it. And then you wanna make sure you get your trigger inside that little cutout on the plastic frame. Trigger's in, and then you kind of nosedive that aluminum frame forward like this, and then you compress the entire thing, making sure none of those springs or linkage pops out of place while you're doing it. And it's pretty easy on the P11. You know, the PF9 is a little bit trickier. Make sure we keep a little tension on it. Take your frame pins and just start dropping them in. And then we will just hammer them all in right away. All right, good to go. We got our frame pins back in. Everything is just perfect now. All right, now that we got the pistol grip frame back together, we need to go ahead and set the spring tension on that hammer before we put the slide back on. So you'll pull up on that hammer spring catch all the way up, and you want to get to clear those two little tabs right there and then locate in that channel. So we'll pull up and push straight back. One solid smooth motion just like that. All right, now we've got tension on that hammer. Good. So now we can take the slide. We'll just slide it right on. Push back just a hair till that slides flush with the back of the frame. You'll see those lugs right there in that barrel line up. And what I like to do is put that punch in there and then just pull back on the slide, lock the slide in place, and then it's already lined up for that assembly pin, and drop the assembly pin right in and you're good to go. Look at that stainless steel guide rod, that barrel, that really looks nice. Really excellent, simple, fast. Ooh, nice light trigger pull, man. Oh yeah, that's much better. Oh yeah. Now let's see what kind of modified trigger pull we got. 3 pounds, 8.6 ounces. Now let's take one more to confirm. 3 pounds, 8.4 ounces. Well, there you have it, guys. 50% trigger pull reduction for your KEL TEC P11 pistol. Just can't beat it. From 7.5 down to 3.5. Much more functional, man. Really love the way this trigger feels, functions. Nice, crisp reset as well. So we really didn't sacrifice anything on the function side. We just made it that much more pleasant to shoot. Really love it. Plus the additional upgrades were great. Little things to throw in as you're doing this anyway. You've already got it in a million pieces, you might as well. We didn't have the textured rubber adhesive grips in this video, but really simple, straightforward installation. We have a video for a bunch of the other grips, so really simple, straightforward process. Highly recommend it, especially for these polymer frames. Man, this thing feels nice, really smooth. You can see how clean that trigger pull is now. It's not as gritty or heavy. It's kind of a smooth, straightforward pull like you'd expect on a trigger. Nothing that's got a serious wall at the end of it. So really love this pistol now. Much more enjoyable shooter. Hope you guys enjoy. Looking forward to your feedback and results. Thank you, MCARBO Brotherhood, for your ideas and your support. And as always, happy shooting.